So there's one participant that's showing up as a phone number. It's an 865 prefix calling in. Could you please identify yourself so we can rename you?
Hello. Okay. Yeah. So. Sorry. Yeah. Really, just what we need is just kind of pretty much, a little bit of silence and like I'm about to start, and then start. A moment later. Yeah.
This is the May 12th, 2020 convening of the City of Portland Budget Committee. Under Portland City Code and state law, the City Council is holding this meeting electronically. All members of the council are attending remotely by phone, and the city has made several avenues available for the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. The council is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and promote social distancing. The pandemic is an emergency that threatens the public health, safety, and welfare, which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. Thank you all for your continued patience, flexibility, and understanding as we manage through this difficult situation to do the city's business. Carla, could you please call the roll?
Hardesty?
Here.
Udaley?
Here.
Fritz?
Here.
Wheeler?
Here. As required by Oregon budget law, my budget message has been delivered as part of the materials for today's session. This message can also be viewed in my proposed budget on the City Budget Office website at www.portlandoregon.gov/CBO. Colleagues, as we know, the COVID-19 crisis is forecast to reduce Portland's general fund budget by $75 million in the fiscal year 2021. In my proposed budget, I've taken measured but significant steps to reduce our costs and close the budget gap while preserving important city services and protecting our equity and climate action work. The budget identifies $59 million in savings without asking bureaus for cuts. This budget also makes targeted investments in priority work to serve the most vulnerable, invests in programs supporting climate action in the city and throughout the community, modest investments in city infrastructure and assets, and preserves current funding levels for the Joint Office of Homeless Services. To reduce costs without layoffs, I instituted a wage freeze, COLA freeze, and furlough requirement for our non-represented employees. No city employee making less than the living wage of $61,000 will have to take furlough days. Those making less than $87,900 will take 5 days. Higher paid employees will take 10 days. This budget freezes the normal inflationary increase, which bureaus typically receive for general fund materials and services costs, and directs all bureaus to limit this spending. These steps help us to get closer to closing the gap without layoffs and without canceling programs. The wage freezes and furlough requirements our non-represented employees are taking, and the reductions we're asking many of our grantees and contractors to take generate significant savings. I myself have also personally made sacrifices in this budget. But they don't get us all the way there, and it's not fair that only our non-represented employees would feel these impacts. I've also asked our labor partners to share in these actions. Their participation would more than double the savings we achieved by taking these steps with our non-represented workforce, significantly reducing the need to take more disruptive programmatic cuts. We're all city employees, and we all share in the value of public service. I believe we also share the value of saving jobs. Altogether, my proposed budget closes 88% of the expected $75 million budget gap. We'll address the remaining 12% this fall in our annual fall budget monitoring process, otherwise known as the fall bump. The COVID-19 crisis is forcing hard choices, and when we make hard choices, we reveal what matters the most. I believe in the strength and resilience of this community. I believe in the City Council to make decisions that protect and serve our frontline communities first. And I believe that if we're thoughtful and strategic in our decisions about this budget, we will reshape our city to better serve all Portlanders. I'll now turn this over to Budget Director Jessica Kennard to walk us through the agenda and materials for today's work session. Director Kennard.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning to you and members of council and colleagues. For the record, Jessica Kennard, City Budget Director. So today, for our agenda, we'll be discussing the Mayor's proposed budget and changes to be considered as part of the approved budget hearing. For context, given the unusual financial situation we're in this year, I'll be first providing an overview of the changes in the financial landscape over the last couple of months. I will then be walking through high-level components of how the mayor balanced to the new financial reality. We will spend some time talking about current Cannabis Fund allocations, and finally review budget notes as currently included in the approved budget filing. At any point in my review of the above items, we can have open questions and discussion. This is, even though it's a convening of the budget committee, it's still a work session, so we want open and free discussion. After I review what's in the mayor's proposed budget, I will then walk through the changes that have been included in the filing documents for the approved budget, and we will have additional time at the end for questions. A number of Bureau contacts are on the line, and we will do our best to facilitate answers in a timely manner if we don't have a representative able to address your immediate question. During these presentations, I will be screen sharing and will have limited ability to see if people have their hands raised or if you're submitting a chat comment. So please do not be shy about interrupting me to ask a question, or Mayor, if you see someone with their hand raised, please feel free to stop me.
Yeah, if I could just add, Jessica, I can see the participant list. So if people raise their hands, I'll call on them.
Great, excellent. And I will also pause between items to allow for questions. All right, so it seems like ages ago, but just back in February, which was actually only 3 months ago, we were looking at $28.5 million in excess general fund discretionary resources. As you recall, this was about $4.5 million in ongoing and $24 million of one-time. Then, of course, the COVID-19 crisis happened. And as you know, the governor declared a state of emergency on March 8th, and then issued the Stay Home, Save Lives order on March 23rd, just 2.5 short months ago. The city economist updated our forecast 1 month later on April 21st to reflect a $75 million decline in our discretionary resource, and the mayor's proposed budget was released roughly 2 weeks following on May 7th. This chart shows at a high level how the mayor's proposed budget balanced to this sudden new reality. I know it's a busy visual, so I'm going to take the next several minutes to walk you through this chart and what's behind the numbers. The blue in the chart shows the reductions that are included in the mayor's proposed budget, while the green shows the limited priority net adds that were included. Let's see. So in fact, several more adds were supported than what is shown on this slide. This is because this represents the allocation of new discretionary resources, and the mayor's proposed budget includes adds that are supported by carryover from the current fiscal year, which we discussed as part of the mayor's spring bump work session last week, as well as adds that are supported by non-general fund resources. You can see here that the largest net add is for continuity of homeless services, followed by supporting bargain labor agreements with our public safety frontline workers. You can also see adds for ADA curb cuts, park service, and support for other priorities. The largest of these continued support, the largest of the sort of this last bucket, the other priorities, is continued support for limited term employees in the Revenue Collection Division. Additionally, there is support for climate action work, a livability programs coordinator, the Charter Review Commission work, the Rose Festival, and Portlanders United Against Hate. I'm going to pause for questions here, as I know there's a lot of items that aren't listed, and if there aren't questions now, we can also have further discussion later in the work session. I'm pausing for discussion on the add side of the ledger before moving to the reduction side. Okay. All right, so on the left side, you see the reductions in blue. Going from the center left, the first solution was to eliminate that $28.5 million in forecasted revenues. Next, the mayor's budget draws upon reserves and set-asides to generate $17.1 million in savings. This is the second bucket here. The largest contributor to this category is a draw on the capital set-aside at about $5.5 million. Additionally, approximately $2 million in one-time resources is being reallocated from a number of items, including Police Bureau contribution to supporting the replacement of their records management system, Portland Harbor cleanup reserves, Build Portland debt service costs, previously unallocated short-term rental revenue. This particular allocation is supporting the Joint Office one-time funding request, Also about $2 million in accounting fund balance resources that are being recognized as part of the spring bump process. And I also want to acknowledge the work of Michelle Kirby and her team, who identified a total of $950,000 in pension bond debt reserves that are no longer necessary and have been reallocated to fund our gap. So a number of different solutions that are in that bucket. The budget then identifies current year underspending for an additional $13.8 million. The majority of these resources are resources that were discussed as part of the spring bump work session last week. Most notably, this includes non-needed compensation set-aside resources from the current year at about $5.2 million. This also includes a reallocation of one-time funds for the body-worn camera program, non-needed funds for the Office of Accountable Elections, and $500,000 in funding for Mount Tabor renovations that are not anticipated to be needed in this coming fiscal year. This category also assumes estimated underspending that will occur and fall to balance as a result of the current freeze on non-essential materials and services spending. These leftmost three bars are solutions impacting current Bureau programs or services, which constitute $29 million of the funding gap, or a 5.6% budget cut across general fund supported bureaus. The mayor's budget assumes citywide cost containment strategies. This includes the wage freezes, furloughs, and materials and services inflationary reductions to generate about $16.4 million in discretionary savings. There are also a handful of program-specific reductions that the mayor's budget assumes, generating about $3.2 million in savings. These predominantly include reductions in the police bureau, as well as reductions to special appropriations. This leaves the balance, which is this final bar, about $9.2 million, for which bureaus are being directed to bring forward reductions as part of the fall bump process. That is my overview of the items that are included in the mayor's proposed. I want to pause there and see if there are questions. Okay. All right, so we will now walk through the Cannabis Fund allocations as included in the mayor's proposed budget. So you can see on the top here, the yellow items are items that were already included in the base budget that received ongoing Cannabis Fund allocations. The green are the items that were newly allocated this year as part of the mayor's proposed budget process. You can see $50,000 in ongoing going towards Mercatus support, $210,000 of one-time going towards Cannabis Business Development Program, and $547,000 going towards community grants for Prosper Portland's budget. Going to pause and see if there are questions, or if people would like to have a discussion on this now. We can also have a discussion at the end if you would like.
I do have a couple of questions about this chart. So we have not yet had a conversation about, we had a work session on the Cannabis Fund. I can't remember, sometime in the last 6 months. We never had a follow-up to actually have a council vision about how these cannabis dollars should be invested in our community. Based on that work session that we had, I think it was clear that most of us did not think law enforcement was the right investment of cannabis tax dollars, especially the overwhelming number of dollars that went to support policing services as opposed to community programs. And so I know COVID prevented us from having a more detailed conversation, but I am concerned that if this moves forward as presented, that we will continue to status quo of how we've utilized these funds without really thinking what will be different when we move beyond where we were pre-COVID-19. I anticipate policing will look a lot different, just like fire will look different, and we will be rebuilding on some good community efforts that we've been involved in. And so I am concerned that this is pretty much held harmless when in fact we know the need for these dollars to go out the door to support community is significant. So I just want to put that out there. And I guess that's not a Jessica question. It's more of a mayor question and a question with my colleagues about where we want to invest cannabis dollars, where we think they would do the most good. So I've complained about this allotment before. We had a work session, but we haven't changed this allotment at all.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Daly, then Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I don't see Civic Life's share of the cannabis tax allocation in the materials provided, but we were under the impression that we were getting a small sum, I think $47,000. So I need clarity on how much Civic Life will receive for our restorative justice grants. And I'm in general agreement with Commissioner Hardesty, although this allocation has changed, there's $0 for our social equity grants, and serving communities that were harmed by our drug laws is my top priority for these dollars. So that's my question and my primary concern.
Commissioner Fritz.
Thank you, Mayor. Was there a question to Jessica? Was there a carryover for Civic Life in the supplemental bump?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner, for that reminder. This only shows the annual allocations. In addition, there is a carryover. I believe it was around $210,000. I will confirm that with my staff. But for Prosper Portland, for an allocation that was given to Prosper Portland in the current year.
But there wasn't one for Civic Life?
Let me confirm that with my staff, and I will, let's see, I'm getting a chat item.
And meanwhile, Commissioner Daly, did you have another question?
I don't,
I'm not done yet.
Commissioner, I'm going to find out for you, and I will get back to you as soon as possible on this call.
Okay, thank you. Because I do support having a small allocation for Civic Life, and I thought that was part of the proposal. And then second of all, we had talked in the work session about the original allocation to the Police Bureau was for the, I'm blanking on the name, the service coordination team, which is drug rehab and wraparound services for people with significant challenges. And so I believe that should be, and the reason that was switched out was in a previous budget when the Portland Business Alliance were really keen to have different dollars directed to that funding. But I would feel more comfortable if the ongoing in the police were for the service coordination team, knowing that I won't be able to participate in the discussion next year.
So, Commissioner, in answer to your question, the $210,000 carryover was Civic Life underspending, cannabis underspending, but it was intended to be sent to Prosper from Civic Life. So Civic Life does not have an allocation currently in the 2021 budget.
And if I may comment on something Commissioner Fritz said, the service coordination team is 2 Portland police officers, 1 sworn and 1 non-sworn. The services that are provided by Central City Concern. So I don't think it would cost us over $2 million to support what Portland Police currently provides as part of the service coordination team services.
Actually, Commissioner, the service coordination team includes the funding for Central City Concern for the drug and alcohol treatment program. It includes the residential portion as well. That's all part of the funding.
Very good. Any further questions for right now?
well, yeah, no one answered my question. So
Could you
I remain, pardon?
Could you restate it just so Jessica has the question?
what happened to the civic life allocation of the cannabis tax?
So there was a small balance, Commissioner. The 47,000 that you referred to was as when we initially released sort of before final decisions. That was a technical mistake on our part, where the intention in the mayor's proposed was to have the entirety of the funds going to Prosper for community grants. That is the explanation for the 47,000. That doesn't answer your question with regards to what amount should be in civic life for community grants and for your social equity grants. That is a question for the council.
Thank you.
And just as a reminder, the previous funding was one-time money. So what's the difference is that no one-time money is allocated to civic life this year.
Well, the difference is you're completely eliminating a grant program that the social equity grant program that we set up. That's the difference.
So I think part of the challenge has been, Commissioner Udaley, to your point, has been around how quickly we can get those dollars out the door. I know I have personally been frustrated with the fact that it takes almost a year to get very few dollars out the door through that process. And I am hearing from people every day the need to get money out the door into their hands right now, as compared to other avenues that we could take. So I support a one-time allocation going to Prosper Portland so that those dollars go out the door within 2 weeks rather than the amount of time it's taken us thus far.
And if I may ask Jessica, just to be clear, this is our opportunity to ask lots of questions, to think about potential amendments to the budget. Just for clarification to the public, this is not the final budget. This is the beginning document, which is the proposed balanced budget.
That's right, Mayor. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Commissioner.
I was just going to say, and we can't make decisions in work sessions, so we're just airing the issues and having a discussion.
Exactly. Thank you, Commissioner Fritz. Commissioner Hardis, do you have your hand up?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I remembered I was on mute. We have continued to say that the police allocation is for DUI training and Vision Zero traffic enforcement, but we, in our work sessions, I have understood that we have not added any additional training through this allotment. My understanding is that all this money has gone to traffic. Is that correct? Am I understanding this correctly?
I believe so, Commissioner. I believe we also do have folks from the Police Bureau on the call. And I'm not sure if any of our Police Bureau colleagues might have additional information. I see their finance manager and the chief is on the call, as well as Assistant Chief Lee. So would one of you be able to specifically talk to the allocation of traffic cannabis resources?
Thank you, Jessica. As far as the commissioner's question regarding how much—
Chief, could you identify yourself for the record? Sorry.
Yes, sorry, this is Chief Rush. As far as the commissioner's question regarding the amount of the separation of that between the traffic enforcement and what is used for training, I will have to get to that and I'll get back to you. I don't know the exact breakdown.
I appreciate that, Chief Jamie. And my question is really around additional DUI training that has been developed based on the influx of cannabis dollars. I think at one point there was just a swap out between general fund and cannabis dollars. And I just want to make sure that the dollars that we're actually investing in addressing the issues around cannabis.
Okay, yep, I'll look into that for you.
All right.
Commissioner Fritz, then Commissioner Udaly.
And we did have the work session on the traffic division, and I know that Chief Resch acknowledges that this shouldn't be backselling, although the ballot measure that was passed didn't actually say that there would be additional services. There was going to be additional training to recognize in people who are impaired with cannabis rather than alcohol, which is a different skill set. So is that happening, Chief Resch?
Yes, to my understanding, we're training more officers on DRE, which is drug recognition experts. So I can get that breakdown for you as well.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hardesty, you have your hand up still?
Sorry, Mayor, I'm going to put my hand down.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Udaly.
Yes, thank you. Chief Resch, can you tell me if this almost $3 million will deliver any additional FTE or increase in enforcement, in traffic enforcement?
You mean, will I add additional officers to the traffic division?
Yes.
I have no intent right now to add additional officers to the traffic division, but that just depends on how our staffing goes with our hiring. It's a priority to add to the traffic division.
Okay. There's been an ongoing conversation about this because while the ballot measure may not have explicitly stated that these funds would be used to increase traffic enforcement, I think it's reasonable that the expectation was there. It certainly didn't say that the funds would be used to supplant existing funding, which is what has happened for the last 3 years. And you haven't been here for these conversations before, but I've been very vocal about my displeasure that we have seen no increase in traffic enforcement with these funds. I understand these are extraordinary circumstances with the budget, but I'm just going to continue to assert that desire to see an increase in traffic enforcement if we're going to continue to allocate cannabis tax dollars to the Bureau.
Jessica, I'm not seeing the breakdown of the programs within Portland Police Bureau's budget that support the overall budget, right? So for example, as Commissioner Frisk mentioned, the service coordination team, I'm not finding that in the budget. Can you show me where that is in the budget? Tell me where I would find it.
In the mayor's proposed budget document.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you won't find it. The mayor's proposed budget document just shows our marginal changes, not the, it would be contained within the overall numbers that you see in their total budget. Our adopted budget document is a lot more robust in terms of the programmatic information that it includes. We include all of the cities, the several hundred program offers that we have across the city. That is not part of the mayor's proposed budget document itself, but you can find it in the Bureau's program offers that were provided as part of their requested budget. And so I can get that document to you.
I would appreciate it because I think otherwise we're comparing apples to oranges. And I just want to acknowledge that I think life's I know life's going to be a lot different post pandemic than it was before. And so for me, I'm really looking at this budget through the vision that the mayor set down about what we're going to be building towards. And so I would hope that people take questions in the spirit of what are we building when we come out of this pandemic? Because I will say again, I have no interest in rebuilding systems that were unequitable and unfair to a lot of community members. And so I hope that we have the opportunity in this budget in a very short time we have to really talk about what is our vision for the future and how does this budget start putting the benchmarks in place for rebuilding after our budget has recovered. I don't think any of us who've been paying attention expects this to be quick. This will be years in the making coming back. But I am concerned that without a vision of where we're going, it just looks like we're kind of picking and choosing, what our favorites are. So I hope that that's the spirit that we are participating in this conversation and then ultimately the vote. Thank you.
Commissioner Fritz.
I know we're having a good discussion on this. I know that also, Mayor, you're going to have a discussion about that vision next week in the CARES work session, and hopefully a council resolution that we can agree to. We have time to prepare that. I agree with Commissioner Hardesty that we do need to be looking to what's most important for the future. And over the 12 years, the 12 budgets that I've been a part of now, multiple times the service coordination team has been proposed to be cut. And as we come out of the pandemic, we're going to have more people in poverty. We're going to have more people struggling to survive, and we're certainly going to have more people with drug and alcohol addiction problems. So as I think about which programs within the Police Bureau I really want to safeguard, the service coordination team is definitely one of them and would be an entirely appropriate allocation of cannabis tax money. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll chime in here. I'm trying to leave my colleagues maximum latitude to discuss this since I get my say through the issuance of the proposed. But I do want to remind people that the service coordination team was amongst my highest priorities 2 budget cycles, may have even been 3 budget cycles ago now, unbelievably. The service coordination team, I believe, is one of the more effective programs we have in place. Anybody who has ever participated in one of their graduation ceremonies knows that it is a tremendous interface for people who are really struggling with addiction issues in our community. They come into conflict with the criminal justice system. And this is this rare opportunity where the criminal justice system, in working with community providers and people who are disproportionately impacted by addiction and rotating in and out of the criminal justice system, can actually gain the support and the help and the networking in the community that they need to be successful, both in their recovery as well as having fewer, if any, interactions later with the criminal justice system. So because it is not noted in the marginal changes of this particular budget, please do not take that as a statement that it is not still a top priority for me. It absolutely is. And that's why, as much as possible, we have protected it from budget reductions, even during this significant budget crisis. And as for the allocation of the cannabis resources, I am completely open to this. This, for me, was our first attempt to support those programs that have shown to be successful. And you'll see that drug and alcohol treatment is also included through the base support of the Housing Bureau through the Cannabis Fund. Did I bore everybody to death? What happened?
I was having an elongated pause because I didn't want to cut short the.
I thought everybody fell asleep or something. Okay.
No, Mayor. Right here.
All right. So this is a great discussion. And again, to reiterate what others have said, that is the purpose of this conversation, is to have a discussion to talk about members of council's interests or desires and the changes that you would like to see as part of the approved budget process, so that we can seed that conversation and you may bring forward amendments to the approved budget when it comes to you next Wednesday. Are there any other items that members of council would like to discuss in relation to these allocations? Okay.
Can I ask a question? And this may be an open signal question. This may be a Carla question. We have been successful previously in having the commissioners listed close to the top of the list of participants. And for some reason today, after the commissioners are done speaking, they're falling all over the participant list. So it's harder for me to keep an eye on all of the commissioners and whether they're raising their hands. Is there, Carla, is there some way to fix that and move the commissioners to the top of the list?
Keelan and Rick are also on this line, but I believe we need to renumber the commissioners. Is that correct? Either Rick or Keelan?
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Can we do that now?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank
I think
you.
they'll get it fixed, Mayor. Thank you.
I appreciate it. It's just a little harder to call on people. Thank you.
Okay, so hearing no further questions about cannabis allocation at this time, we can come back to it later. I am going to jump to our budget notes as they are contained in the the mayor's proposed budget. There has been one change in the currently filed documents for the approved. I will walk you through both what was in the proposed as well as that change. So this is also referred to as attachment D in the email that I sent to you all last night. So first we have a one-time waiver of a capital set aside. Not going to take the time to read all the way through this, but of course I can if anybody would like to take that time. This is essentially noting that the city's capital asset funding gap is one of the most critical looming challenges, and that while council will be waiving financial policy to utilize the capital set aside resources to help fund the funding gap in this year, that the waiver of this policy should be seen as a one-time occurrence, and that the council intends to comply with financial policy in the allocation of capital set aside in the future. It also states that projects scored in the capital set aside process shall be affirmatively considered for any eligible funds received from state or federal stimulus packages. Next, we have one that is reporting on climate action investments. So there are two packages in the mayor's proposed specifically that are called attention to here. One in the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, one in the Office of Management and Finance Division of Asset Management, related to green fleet and carbon reduction efforts. And so this is a requirement that those two initiatives report annually on the outcomes of these investments in climate action. Both bureaus will set clear definitions of success and including benchmarking performance measures. And then the final sentence is, as the FY 2021 budget only includes limited resources for program expansion, it's critical to council and the community that measurable results are achieved to warrant continued investments. This is the one change that has occurred in between the mayor's release of his proposed budget and the filing of the approved. There was a budget note around citywide communications that has been removed from the approved budget filing.
Commissioner Udaley. You're muted.
I want to express my disappointment that this item was removed. It's something that we desperately need, in particular right now. And I'd like to know why it was removed, because I supported it, the mayor supported it.
Yeah, so let me speak to this. A little context and then some reasoning. First of all, as part of the city's COVID-19 response, we have stood up a joint information center, which has been a centralized and coordinated communication structure that ensures that the city has been speaking both clearly and consistently and with one voice to the community. And I have certainly seen the value of this structure, and others concur, and I believe that some parts of it should continue. I asked Tom Reinhardt to convene a group to talk about what we've learned from this experience and how we could better coordinate all citywide communications on a permanent basis. I removed this specific budget note because we're still in discussion about some of the details, that I want to be crystal clear. The conversation is continuing and it will continue. And if we're ready to take it up in the fall with a specific proposal, we will. And if not, we won't.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I am well aware of the efforts of the Information Center as I redeployed my policy director to that effort. Okay.
we got hung up on the budget note. The work will continue, and your policy director's engagement is very, very important, as is the engagement of my policy director as well. So the work will continue. The question really came up as to whether or not it should be included as a budget note. And I've concluded that that is not necessary.
All right.
Just for the record, I think it's critical that the city gets better at communicating. So I hope that we will have something in the fall to respond to.
Yes, and Commissioner Hardesty, we've appreciated your staff's engagement in this process as well. I think there's certainly value to be added here.
So the next budget note, also in the Office of Management and Finance, as well as in Civic Life and the Police Bureau, discusses some moves that are some space moves that may be underway next year. It discusses the opportunity to reduce costs by taking advantage of space we already own. Portland Police Bureau currently leases space at the Gateway Center, and so this discusses a series of moves that can take place to make it so that the lease space would no longer be necessary, which could lead to savings.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I just want to weigh in. I think one of the criteria that has to be considered in moving Portland Police out of Gateway is how it will impact services for people experiencing domestic violence. What we have now at Gateway is a ideal situation with well-trained professional police officers who understand how to engage with community members who are experiencing domestic violence. Requiring community members experiencing domestic violence to go into a police setting would be very detrimental to the relationships that the officers at Gateway have built with service providers, with community members. And I think that must be weighed as heavily as cost savings when it comes to the services that these police officers. Yes, Mayor, I am advocating for police. I think he's a little surprised. What I know is that what they do, where they do it, is a unique service that we cannot afford to lose. And it just would not be, I believe, comfortable for someone experiencing domestic violence to have to go into a police setting where other people who are under police supervision show up to have services as well.
Commissioner Daly. Thank you, Commissioner Hardesty.
That I didn't have my hand up.
Oh, sorry. Okay, good enough. And just so people, and I think this is a conversation worth having. There is a greater than zero chance of a survivor, domestic violence survivor, running into a suspected offender, and I share that concern. And it may be that as we weigh this conversation, we decide that risk is too great. On the flip side, the savings are about $275,000 a year for the rent that's paid at the Gateway Center. So let's parking lot. This is a conversation we want to have going forward with more information.
The next budget note directs the Chief Administrative Officer and the Public Safety Work Group to identify changes to improve public safety, increase equity, and address systematic challenges at a citywide level. Specifically, it directs the CAO to present a proposed organizational structure for shared administrative services for public safety bureaus. States that the proposal should be aligned with the public safety strategic plan and contribute to any required savings as requested as part of the 21-22 budget guidance. And that council also requests guidance regarding a long-term governance and accountability structure for public safety as a citywide system. The next group of items are within the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. This reporting on climate action we already discussed. It is directed to BPS as well as Office of Management and Finance. This is reporting on the outcomes of investments in climate action. There's also a budget note that explains investments in our FEMA floodplain regulations. This explains how the city began funding a multi-year effort to ensure the National Flood Insurance Program in Oregon complies with the Endangered Species Act. Multiple city bureaus have collaborated and supported the floodplain regulation work in anticipation of new guidelines. And so continued work on the floodplain management work plan will continue in 2021, but due to the current crisis, the sudden dramatic decline of available discretionary resources, discretionary funding for the work is on hold, pending clarity around the timeline of the official guidance for FEMA. Once the timeline is confirmed, City Council intends to fully support compliance efforts. So this just explains the path forward for supporting those endeavors.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure everybody understands that we're in no way shirking our obligation. We support going forward. We just don't believe we need to expend those resources right now. So we are clawing back those resources with the expectation we will not need them. But if it turns out that that guidance does come, then we will go to Plan B. But we're pretty confident that we will not need to expend those resources.
The next item is for Rose Festival funding and future requests. Recognizing that the Rose Festival, as the official festival of Portland, makes important contributions to Portland's economy and culture. This explains that the budget, the mayor's proposed budget, allocates $50,000 in one-time resources to the festival and directs my office, the city budget office, to develop a proposal for $100,000 in ongoing resources for council to consider as part of the next year's budget development process. There are a number of budget notes that, I'm sorry, there's one budget note. I don't think there's a number, I think there's one that goes towards all bureaus to limit non-essential materials and services spending. So you'll recall that the mayor's proposed budget takes the general fund resource associated with materials and services inflation, but in addition, it also directs bureaus to also limit their own materials and services in all funds, across funds. So non-general fund bureaus and programs are directed to limit discretionary and non-essential spending where possible, reducing their inflationary spending to adjust to the lower level of resources. And that concludes the budget notes that are currently included in the approved budget as filed. I will now pause for discussion around budget notes if there are any other items that council would like to discuss or talk about potentially including in the approved budget.
All right, it looks like you're good to go, Jessica.
Okay. All right, so I believe that concludes the discussion of what is currently in the mayor's proposed. We have started jumping into a little bit of what's in the approved budget as filed with the change that I discussed to the budget note. The other document that we typically walk through that explains changes is what is also called, the budget office is not known for our naming conventions, Attachment B. This document explains all of the changes that have occurred to the mayor's proposed budget in what has been filed for the approved budget. Most of these are technical changes. A number of these are truing up our general fund overhead model or truing up interagency agreements. But there are a couple of items that are that may be of interest to council. So I'm going to walk by each of these items fairly quickly, but please stop me if you have any questions. So first we have the Development Services Fund, and you can see here what this is showing you are, again, it's marginal changes. So this is marginal changes that have been made to FTE or positions, marginal changes that have been made to general fund discretionary resources. This is if the size of the budget has increased or decreased in any of these categories. And then other resources, if the size of the budget has increased or decreased on an aggregate level. So if there's an increase and an offsetting decrease in one bureau, it will net to zero. So that's what you see here in the Development Services Fund. They're reducing contingency by about $3,600 to fund increases in general fund overhead payments. So it nets to zero because there's two offsetting entries there. Within the Bureau of Environmental Services, within their sewer system operating fund, they are reducing their interagency agreement with the city's attorney's office and transferring their savings to contingency and also adjusting to overhead payments. There are a number of true-ups to interagency agreements with the city attorney's office. That's because during the approved phase of the budget, the attorney's office had time to true up the savings that they incurred as a result of the non-represented actions. They were able to run those savings through their interagencies. So other bureaus are benefiting from those savings. They're bringing those interagency costs down for city partners associated with the merit and the COLA freeze for non-represented employees. Environmental Remediation Fund, reduce the interagency agreement again with the city attorney's office and reduce contingency to fund increases in overhead, so technical adjustments there. The Bureau of Planning and Sustainability also making a very small adjustment to true up to general fund overhead payments. You will see a number of true ups related to the council offices. So as you know, we have a policy in the city whereby we equalize all council offices. As all council offices agreed to the same concessions that other bureaus were feeling or experiencing in relation to materials and services freezes and wage freezes. Those particular actions affected different offices differently, depending on the composition of your staff and your materials and services budget. So we ended up with an unequal distribution of reductions across offices. So as part of this true-up process, what our office has done has equalized all of those reductions to be equal to that 5.6% reduction level that everybody else in the city is experiencing in either in this budget or as part of the follow-up guidance for the fall bump. So you see that the numbers are slightly different, and that's because everybody will be getting the same reduction target, which is a 5.6 reduction, and it's about equivalent to $76,000 reduction. I'm sorry, I'm running through this rather quickly. Commissioner of Public Utilities, the general fund, yes, so these are all the same, those reductions. Commissioner of Public Works. Funds and debt management. This is our sort of our central place where we do debt payments. We have our contingency housed in funds and debt management. It's sort of our central repository for a number of funds. Within the general fund, where we made a technical true-up, which is reducing funding beginning balance in the amount of $2.1 million. This is the funding that it's short-term rental revenue that is helping support the joint office in the mayor's proposed budget. We realized that the Housing Bureau had already budgeted this resource as part of their own beginning balance. And so this is a technical true-up. We reduced the fund and debt management side because it is already reflected in the Housing Bureau's budget. There's a technical true-up to the general fund overhead. And then also within the general fund, there were a couple of changes that were made to true up, again, part of our overhead model process. Some additions were run through the overhead model that were not run through the overhead model as part of the mayor's proposed. This action actually increased the available ongoing resource to the city of about $112,000. So this money has been deposited into the contingency account. So contingency typically stands, general fund contingency typically stands at about $3 million. With this change, that contingency amount is about $3.1 million. There's a fund called the Bonded Debt Interest and Sinking Fund within funds management. This processes payments for our general obligation bonds. Right now, mostly our general obligation bond payments in association with the housing bond, as well as still the parks bond. And so this is just making a payment as planned as part of recognizing revenue to make payments for those bonds. Number of changes within the Office of Management and Finance. They are decreasing their general fund discretionary resources. This is one of the true ups that I mentioned that has resulted in increased discretionary general fund. There's, as part of the mayor's proposed, there's a livability programs coordinator that was added to the Office of Management and Finance, and that is being run through the overhead model, which is generating ongoing general fund savings. There's a small change again in the general fund overhead model, again associated with the livability programs coordinator that you can see affecting the, this is the other side of that equation, affecting the overhead side. Within the grants fund, we have a process that we do every year to make sure that we don't end the year with a negative cash balance. And what that means is that, so for all of our federal grants, mainly federal grants, we spend the money and then we get reimbursed later. And so at any given time, we have a negative cash balance in that fund. That only becomes a problem at the end of the fiscal year. You can't end the fiscal year with a negative cash balance. So we process a one-day loan to ourselves to make sure we don't have an end of the year negative balance. And this is part of that one-day loan. This is something that we do every year. There's a one-day loan of about $17 million from the Transportation Operating Fund to ensure that we have a positive fund balance. And when we get down to the Bureau of Transportation, you'll see the other side of that equation. Within the general fund, we are allocating about $48,000 within OMF division, specifically in BRFS, and fixing negative structures. This is just part of a technical true-up and cleanup. Decreasing interagency revenue by $1.2 million to transfer funds to the citywide obligations reserve. This is part of the integrated tax system project, both this item and the next item. So that's a multi-year project. We are replacing our tax revenue collection system. We also intend on collecting revenue from our from other jurisdictions and other partners that are helping fund this process. And so to facilitate that multi-year budgeting, there's part of the revenues and part of the expenditures are going to be placed into our citywide obligations reserve fund. Within the general fund, we're updating procurement division internal allocated costs to better align expenses and revenues. It's a small amount, about $4,600. Within the Technology Services Fund, we're making adjustments to resources associated with multiple ongoing projects, resulting in a $2.3 million increase in our beginning fund balance. They're also within the Technology Services eliminating one position associated with providing services to the Police Bureau for the body-worn camera program. Within the Workers' Compensation Self-Operating Fund, we're decreasing the interagency agreement with the city attorney and doing a technical true-up with our overhead payment. Within the Technology Services Fund, we're moving appropriation into the corporate services account to correct for an interagency allocation error, again, a technical change. Insurance and Claims Operating Fund, decreasing the interagency with the city attorney and truing up the overhead payment. Local Improvement District Fund, reducing contingency by $1, and then updating Local Improvement District Fund to match legal services, another technical true-up. Printing and Distribution Services is an overhead true-up. Within the general fund, reduce miscellaneous revenues associated with the consolidation of the COEP program, Community Opportunities Enhancement and Prime Contractor Development Programs. Facilities operating. I'm sorry. Yes.
Excuse me, that seems to come out of left field, the combination of those programs that are supposed to benefit contractors of color. Where did that decision happen? Is that an administrative decision or is that a decision that happened somewhere else?
Thank you, Commissioner, for stopping me on that one. That is related to, I believe, and I will, I hope somebody from my team will chat me immediately if I'm wrong, but I'm fairly certain that this is related to what we discussed last week at the Spring Bump work session. That Bureau, the Bureau has found a way to increase the efficiencies of these two programs. They used to have separate staff that were managing these two programs. They have since proposed to consolidate the support for those two programs into one administrative staff.
I see.
And so
it's combining the programs, you're just combining the staff into one.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, and I am just checking the chat to make sure. Yes, I have confirmation from my staff that I did not misspeak on that. All right. Within the facilities operating fund, we are just decreasing the interagency revenue by about $2.4 million as a result of changing a revenue to account for how facilities maintenance technicians bill in SAP. So it's a large dollar value, but it's a technical true up outside of the general fund. Health Insurance Operating Fund, we are increasing a small dollar amount for overhead and decreasing the IMS, the internal material service expenses, for reduced city attorney costs. Small true up in the spectator venue and visitors activities funds for the overhead charges. Similarly, small true up in city fleet for overhead charges. As well as in the facilities GEO bond construction fund. Now on to the Office of Equity and Human Rights. There was, we realized when we rolled through some of the reductions related to the external materials and services and the internal materials and services across the cities that there were a couple of small errors. This has been corrected within the Office of Equity and Human Rights. So their interagency agreement allocation with the Bureau of Technology Services was over reduced. And so they have some money that has come back to their budget as a result of that. Within the Bureau of Transportation, the Transportation Operating Fund has some small changes to their license and permit revenue, also technical changes to their overhead payments, and then the adjustment to the City Attorney's Office interagency agreement. This is the other side of that inter-fund loan to make sure our grants fund ends the year on balance. That $17 million is being funded for one day only from the Transportation Operating Fund. The Parking Facilities Fund has a technical true-up related to the overhead model of a small dollar value. Within the Office of Community and Civic Life, we are doing a similar true-up to what we did for the Office of Equity and Human Rights. One-time general fund discretionary is being added back, as well as some other funds associated with our general fund overhead costs for some of the citywide strategies that we rolled through the budget. Within the Cannabis Business Licensing Fund, there's a very small reduction to miscellaneous expenses and truing up for the general fund overhead. Within the Fire Capital Fund, within Portland Fire and Rescue, they are adding $8.4 million. This is a result of action that's being taken as part of the spring budget, the spring supplemental budget. It recognizes increases to beginning fund balance in the Fire Capital Fund because of the Bureau's transferring funds from the General Reserve Fund, which has, and the GEO Bond Fund. Typically, their apparatus funding has been housed in a central reserve, and they've created their own capital reserve fund, and so we're just technically transferring resources to the new capital fund that they have created. The Housing Bureau has the largest, from a dollar standpoint, some of the largest changes as part of this approved filing. You'll see here, this is about $55.6 million that they are recognizing as a result of the anticipated Portland housing bond activity. This is a large allocation, and this is related to our housing bond. Reduction of FTE represents the reallocation. This is a net zero change that you see here between these three lines. They're reallocating their positions to grant fund also for the Metro housing grant tracking. Relatively small change.
Administrative move, Jessica?
For the positions themselves?
Yes, I mean, is it right? I mean, so basically they will no longer be working on the Portland housing bond. They'll be now working on the Metro housing bond.
I believe so. I'm scrolling rapidly through our list of attendees to see if there's anybody from the Housing Bureau that can speak more specifically to this. let me see here. Mike Johnson from the Housing Bureau, I believe, is on the line. Mike, can you speak to the commissioner's question? If you are, check your mute button.
Hi, Mike Johnson from the Housing Bureau. Yes, that's exactly what's going on, because we are starting next fiscal year to ramp up doing the solicitations for projects on the Metro bond. So this reflects the staffing that will be working on that. It's also just a technical adjustment because of the way Metro is providing the funds to the city. It's actually a grant instead of them giving us bond proceeds. So in discussions with OMF, it was decided it's better to track that as a grant. So part of it's really a technical change for that reason.
Thank you. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you, Mike. So then you see here, again, in the grants fund, they are recognizing, I believe for the first time, allocation for the Metro Housing Bond funding. Within the Home Grant Fund, these are just technical adjustments to reflect projects that are underway and to better reflect construction and usage schedules. Within the Housing Investment Fund, the changes reflect the short-term rental resources being used as an internal loan to Metro Housing Grant to provide interim funding for program delivery. Within the Housing Property Fund, there is an increase primarily as a result of continued repair costs for the Headwaters apartments. So you see $1.9 million there. Within the Inclusionary Housing Fund, there's adjustments to projects underway to better reflect construction and usage schedules, similarly with our federal grants. And then within the Tax Increment Financing Reimbursement Fund, our TIF fund, adjustments to projects underway as well to better reflect construction and usage schedules. Within the Office of the City Attorney, there are, as I mentioned before, this is the aggregate total of the reductions that they are rolling through to their partner bureaus. It's a little bit less than $500,000 as a result of the citywide cost containment strategies. So they are rolling through the savings associated with that to their customers or clients across the city. Within the Parks Bureau, there's a decrease of external materials and services and personnel services to reflect the elimination of summer programming expenses. Within Portland International Raceway, we are reducing internal materials and services by a small amount to true up to the overhead payments. Within the Capital Improvement Fund, we are also making a small adjustment to true up to the general fund overhead payment, as well as true up to an interagency with the city attorney. Within the Golf Fund, also an overhead payment true up. Within the Fire, Police, Disability, and Retirement, we're reducing, again, a technical true up for overhead. Similarly, within the Bureau of Emergency Communications. And within the Police Bureau, we are increasing grant revenues associated with the SPEED grant by $30,000. We are almost done here. The Portland Water Bureau has a number of technical true-ups associated with interagency agreements, most notably the City Attorney's Office, as well as the overhead true-up. They are reducing their beginning balance, or I'm sorry, increasing their beginning balance and making true-ups as a result of the decision to pull back some of the Mount Tabor project money that is not needed for next year. Within the Water Construction Fund, again, technical adjustments.
Excuse me, can I just jump in there?
Yes, please.
It's not needed. It's that it's going to be the work is going to be postponed. This was supposed to be the last year of the funding for the historic improvements that were part of an agreement that council made to settle a land use case. So I want to be sure to put on the record that the expectation is that this money will be needed, and also we're still truing up how much has currently been spent and owed to contractors. So there'll be potentially some minor changes there. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that clarification. Within the water bond sinking fund, again, technical adjustments as a result of truing up to the many changes that were made in the proposed budget, as well as within the hydroelectric power operating fund. And finally, within Prosper Portland, there's a technical change transferring 29,000 of the reduction that was rolled through their budget from one program, the Traded Sector program, to the Inclusive Business Resource Network program. And that is the entirety of that document. If I have not put you all to sleep, we can now have the remainder of our discussion. I believe I'm just going to check my agenda here.
That's correct.
And that is it. So I will cease sharing my screen and turn the floor over to the group for further discussion.
Very good, Colleen.
So, Mayor, I have a question around the Office of Equity and Human Rights. As I think about kind of how you've shaped your budget and what we say the priorities are, I am concerned that the Office of Equity and Human Rights will not be able to provide the level of service necessary for us to be able to truly send our frontline communities and make sure that all of our work that we're doing moving forward happens through an equity lens. So as I think about, some of the things that were protected, I'm very concerned that the Office of Equity will be falling further behind, and the need for their service is greater than it's ever been. So I would love to hear your thinking on how we're going to get to the goals that we've set without actually investing in the Office of Equity and Human Rights.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Commissioner. I'll let Director Kennard speak as well when I'm done. And Commissioner Fritz, I see you have your hand raised as well. So this comes down to a hard choice. And at the end of the day, as you and I have discussed, one of the priorities for me is to have this budget be a bridge to a future Portland where everybody feels that they are part of that future, that they have ownership of it, and that they are engaged. And in this particular case, I had to choose between external public-facing opportunities versus internal operations and internal-facing operations. I wish there was more funding to go around, but forced to make the choice, I chose the external facing equity operations over internal.
I appreciate that. I am hopeful that as we move forward in this process, that we are able to invest in the Office of Equity, because I've seen the work that they've done to help Prosper really center frontline communities. And that doesn't happen without resources.
No disagreement. No disagreement at all. I mean, in part, it's the cards we've been dealt. In part, it's the hierarchy that I used as I was trying to prioritize this budget. I don't envy the work that you did in less than a week to pull this budget together. So I applaud you. Truly, I do. Right, yeah,
but I think this is the conversation that we have to have when we talk about what are we building towards. Because if our budget is supposedly our values document, and we're not investing in moving forward an equitable outcome, then we will get what we've always gotten. I see.
And I'm keenly aware of that. And I just want to note that the proposed budget includes significant resources for external partners that center frontline communities. And again, I just had to make a choice, and that's how I chose. The council may come out differently. Director Kennard, you may have added information, and I want to let Dr. Smith speak as well, since she is on the call.
What about me?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and then I see Commissioner Fritz and Commissioner Bailey have their hands raised. Yes, I haven't forgotten you. Don't worry. Director Kennard, did you have any specific follow-ups?
No, I would just, I think, Mayor, you said it well. I think that, that there were limited options, and we were looking under every rock to try to maximize the amount of ability of us to close the funding gap without cutting services and programs.
Very good. And Commissioner Fritz, can I give Dr. Smith in just before I give to you and Commissioner Udaley?
Well, I'm in charge of the office, but.
All right, very good. Commissioner Fritz has made a compelling case. Commissioner Fritz, then Commissioner Udaley, then Dr. Smith, and let's stick with that.
Thank you. And it's not that I obviously have absolute confidence in Dr. Smith, and also as the commissioner in charge, I want to first thank Commissioner Hardesty for her statements and support, and in fact, every member of the council. It's one of the best things about the COVID response has been how everybody has been thinking about equity. And I appreciate, Mayor, that you are directing money into the community where it is certainly needed. On the other hand, the Office of Equity and its staff needs to be able to help guide that work. And as you will remember, way back before COVID, we recognized that there's a structural deficit in the Office of Equity's base budget, that it has hardly any materials and services, and when staff stay, as they have under Dr. Smith's over a year now, we don't have any vacancy savings to make things to pull ends together. So in particular, there are three parts of the requests that we made that I believe are absolutely essential, and that's a small amount to make the deputy director's salary whole, which we've already funded at least twice on a temporary basis, and that needs to be ongoing. There's the interagency with the Housing Bureau for financial assistance, which they have the expertise, and it's actually a very good way of providing that expertise. And then there's the administrative assistant who's been working at 0.9 and really needs to be at 0.1. I mean, it's at 1.0. So all of those requests come to only $29,540 of general fund money. So less than $30,000 of general fund money. And I appreciate that you have directed money elsewhere, but actually, if all 5 of the council offices agreed to shave off $6,000 from our office budget, that could be taken care of. And so if all else fails, I would request that council offices consider that request. And now I'll toss it to Dr. Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Dr. Smith, and then Commissioner Daly, I'll come to you.
That wasn't the order that you said, but.
No, I changed it. Commissioner Fritz would like you to go now.
I was trying to help you out, Commissioner.
I have no objection.
I lowered my hand because my question is not about OEHR. So I cede the floor.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
I just will make it really quick. Thank you both, Commissioner Hardesty and obviously Commissioner Fritz, for the support. And I would say, we will figure it out, but it is obviously a concern to me that we not be able to really fully realize what equity looks like for City of Portland, and to do that with support from our office. We have been, I think, positioned to do that. And I feel like it is my charge to make sure that I advocate that we're able to do that. And the other piece that I would say is that what really does have a very direct impact on what happens externally. And so while it seems as though, these things that happen within our office, ultimately that connects with the community in a very impactful way, I think, from my perspective, and that we value that. And I would say also that as we're thinking about what happens with our budget, that we really, prioritize, equity work, right? And that if it, is not coming directly to us, that bureaus are also thinking about how they can carve out ways in which to participate in whatever, equity related trainings or opportunities that we have available to make what happens within our bureaus as a whole go better. And so obviously I want the money, right? Because I want to be able to deliver those services, but I understand the position that we're in. And I would say, Commissioner Fritz, she knows that those are the 3 priorities for me as well. I think from just an operations standpoint, I really do need that deputy director position. I am right now doing everything. So it is very difficult to manage that. And so having that position is important, as well as the financial support that we have through our contract with PHB and our administrative support. So those would be my top priorities as well. So thank you. Appreciate it.
So, thank you, Dr. Smith. Mayor, do you mind if I ask Dr. Smith a question?
No, please go for it. This is the time to do it.
Dr. Smith, I am curious, knowing what the mayor's directive is around the budget and this big vision about how we're going to rebuild the city so that the city is more equitable at the end of this pandemic. Has your office given some thought to, based on the work that you and your staff have been doing around this pandemic, what that could look like rolling out, say, next year? And let's just pretend the mayor has fully funded your budget and we're just having a conversation about outcomes, okay? What would it look like a year from now as we are on the other side of this pandemic with the Office of Equity really looking at how the city starts to operate and recover from this pandemic? I hope I'm not putting you on the spot.
No, I think there's a couple of things. One, as you know, we're working on an equity toolkit in partnership with our equity managers and practitioners. And so I think a lot of what that document lays out is some clear demographic data about, the communities that really are experiencing disparate impacts from COVID, and not because of the color of their skin, but rather what has happened in our systems that don't serve them. So I want to make that clarification. I do think that on the other side of this, we're going to have to think about how we engage with community. And what I mean is, like, how are we having conversations with those partners that do this work in community? How are we thinking about grant funding? How are we really sort of looking at this different? And I think from a state perspective, coming from the state, that we were, we gave grants, right? Like we couldn't do that direct service, but we knew folks that could, and were doing it really well and needed that extra support. And so that was a model that I really think helped to make some difference in the education realm. And I think it's something that we might have to think about here as well. And there are some suggestions that I actually gave as a part of the homework, the COVID CARES Act homework that we were given, directors were given a couple of weeks ago, that could be something that our office is helping to lead, while internally still doing our work, right? Still making sure that we're providing the resources, opportunities to bureaus to stretch and grow themselves. But I do think we have to think about like what our community partnership looks like very differently, and how we resource that, and how our office should be the leader in what that looks like.
Well, thank you very much for that, Dr. Smith. And I concur. I think that it's easy for government to get lazy and contract with the same people over and over and over again. And what COVID-19 has really highlighted is that there are a diversity of community-based organizations that serve the community. And most of those don't get to sit at task force tables and don't get to be at city council meetings. And if we're not intentional, we miss those direct voices that are connected to the community. For us here at the city, I think that we're going to be reliant on your office a lot when we, especially as we implement the mayor's vision around this budget. And I want to make sure that you have the resources so that we are successful. The worst thing we could do coming out of this pandemic is to be more inequitable than we were going into it. And so I am concerned without actually solidifying our structures inside City Hall, we're not going to be as effective as we want to be outside City Hall. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Off my soapbox, I'm going back to my coffee.
Thank you.
Very good. And Commissioner Daly, you wanted to raise a different issue?
Yeah, are we ready to
Yeah, I think we
move
are.
on from OHR? Well, first of all, Mayor, I'd like to thank you for funding our ADA curb ramp compliance package, and also allowing us to reinvest cost savings in our street lighting project in East Portland. we accept all other funding cuts, and we're going to work diligently to fund those projects as we can that were cut over the next few years. I also want to thank you for funding Columbia Pool. I'm going to follow up later on some other parks questions. I have 3 top concerns. One is in both BPS and housing, anti-displacement work was not funded. And that is, I know everyone's tired of hearing this phrase, but more important than ever, that we advance this critical work. As you know, my office has been pursuing development of meaningful anti-displacement strategies since I took my seat. And this work, my support for residential infill project is really contingent upon this important work continuing. So I don't know if there's anyone here that can speak to that. I'm fine to just put my concerns on the record if there's no one to respond. Another concern is that the film office was not funded. That is, let's see, I think under Prosper, right? Our arts community is being devastated by this crisis, and in addition to what the arts deliver to our, or do to kind of how essential they are to the spirit of our city, they're also essential to our economy. The film industry in Oregon contributed around $136 million in direct spending to our state's economy in 2014, which is the most recent year I could find. What are our plans to support the film industry as it's impacted by COVID? When I had BDS, I was interested in taking on the film office and actually making it a film, music, and festival office, because I strongly believe we do not do enough to support arts organizations and large-scale events that are so essential to our city and to our economy. And then the third concern or question I have is RAC received a 9% cut, which is the same as other special appropriation programs. Again, the arts are being significantly impacted during this crisis. Other cities have found the resources to invest more in the arts, and we're cutting. So those are my 3 top concerns. If there are people here who can address them now, that's great. If not, we can follow up on these conversations later.
Yes, Director Durbin is here and she can speak to the anti-displacement. If nobody can speak to the film office, I can speak to that. Director Durbin.
Great, thank you, Mayor. For the record, Andrea Durbin, Director of Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. Commissioner Daly, thank you so much for the question. We agree the anti-displacement work is even more important, more critical now, given the economic crisis that we are in. And while we did not receive the budget package allocation, we are moving forward, prioritizing that work, absorbing it by not moving forward with other vacancies. So that's how we'll continue to prioritize that work. We are working on the anti-displacement action plan, doing the analysis, kind of laying out a number of strategies and tools that are available to the city to apply for, to reduce displacement risk. We are updating our displacement risk analysis. And we will are working with the community partners to get ready to convene the task force as well that we've been directed to convene. So that work will continue to be a big priority for BPS.
Thank you. Glad to hear it.
Yeah, thank you.
And I can speak to the film office unless there's somebody smarter and closer to it who's on the call who would like to give the accurate information first. All right, I'll jump in, and then parts of this may get corrected later, but I think I've got the narrative largely correct. You will recall that 2 years ago we put, and Director Kennard, was it 2 years ago we put, it was either a budget note or it was stated on the record by Commissioner Fish that the film office would become self-supporting.
Yep.
And then it is my recollection that in last year's budget, when the question was called, it was indicated by Commissioner Fish that they were not yet self-supporting, but they were close to the strategy to make it self-supporting, and therefore it was requested that we fund it for 1 more year on a one-time only basis, which the council did. This year, given the magnitude of the economic crisis that we are facing and the lack of resources that we have, I chose not to include the film office based on the 2 prior years' discussions we had about the film office. Of course, I think we all agree that the film office provides services, but I believed we should have the conversation rather than it being all in or all out. I believe we need to have a conversation about, if we maintain the film office, what realistically is the future of that office and where is it going and how do we wish to fund it? And so I wanted to precipitate that conversation. And certainly just based on the prior 2 years of public record and deliberations of this council, I chose to exclude it for the proposed budget.
Commissioner,
Okay.
did you have something else?
I mean, I guess we'll just end by saying that I really hope that we consider the arts and arts industries in our COVID response moving forward. Some of these organizations, entities, businesses are going to be the hardest hit, first to close, last to reopen, dependent on large gatherings, essential to our community and essential to our economy. So I look forward to continuing that conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Tori, I see you popped up. Did you have something to add here? Thank you. Tori, could you identify yourself for the record, just so folks know who you are?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tori Campbell, Director of Economic Development at Prosper Portland. And the only thing to add for future conversation, if we wanted to talk about possible alternatives, we've been having some conversations within the film and video industry, and there has been conversation around potentially increasing just the one-time fees for the art industry so that they can at least contribute in that way. So that would reduce the overall ask from general fund. So we're anticipating like maybe $100,000 just in fees that can be applied this year and make up the difference with a smaller request, one time of $70K as an example from general fund. And then that would allow us to at least have 1 more additional year to talk around what's the ongoing approach towards this, knowing that we really want to reduce the amount of general fund that we would need to look into on an annual basis. So ideally, it's moving it more towards the permitting and fees as a way to help sustain it and a few other sources. So,
Thank you, Tori. And Mayor, I did have 1 more question.
You bet.
The Charter Review Commission was funded without the 1 FTE requested. So I'm curious how this is going to impact our ability to support the commission.
Yeah, Director Durbin, can you remind us all of that conversation? I mean, Director Kennard, I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem.
Somewhere
Yeah.
Henry is just like her breath completely hit. And Tom, did you have something to add on this as well?
Yeah, Jessica, do you want me to take this one?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Tom, for the record.
For the record, Tom Reinhardt, Chief Administrative Officer. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
The answer to this question is that we were asked to reallocate some of our existing personnel in the strategic projects and opportunities team and cover this work, and we are going to do that. So yes, we are determined to adequately staff the Charter Review Commission, and we're scheduling a work session with council to talk that through.
Thank you.
I had that same question myself, so I thank Commissioner Udaley for bringing that one up. I'm concerned, but I'm not concerned anymore. Thanks, Tom. I did have a couple of questions. I'm also very concerned about the anti-displacement work that Commissioner Udaley talked about, because what I remember the plan was to actually provide stipends to community members so that they could be equal players at the table with city bureaucrats, bureaus who were attempting to ensure that displacement didn't happen. And so I appreciate Andrea saying they're going to do it within their own budget, but her budget, just like every other city budget, has been cut. And we know that when we are working with very small community-based organizations, if we cannot provide them resources to give them the opportunity to fully participate, they cannot fully participate. And so I'm very concerned that without adequate resources, that process will come to a screeching halt. And I'm also very concerned because I also want RIP to pass this year, and I want RIP to be the model, but we already know where displacement will happen. It's unfortunate that we're having conversation right now about individual efforts rather than having a conversation about where's the city of Portland headed when we get out of this pandemic. Because in my mind, I can think of several places that I would chop entire programs. My colleagues may not agree with me on those programs, but if I look at the vision laid out by the mayor and his proposed budget, I can think of things that coming out of the pandemic, we will not need or want to do or have the resources to do, quite frankly. And so if we're not prioritizing where we're going, we're going to slowly end up back where we have always been because there's no direction about where the star is that we're headed towards. I know this is all about balancing a budget that still won't be balanced when we vote on it. And we are hopeful that we'll know a lot more in the fall. But if we don't know where we're headed by the time we get to the fall, I am very concerned that the assumption is everything we're doing now as a city makes perfect sense after we get out of the pandemic. And I would vehemently say that is absolutely not true. So for me, I would really like us sometime to be thinking about, and how does this budget decision move the needle in the direction that we say we want to move? I'm concerned that you funded Columbia Pool. Columbia Pool won't open this year. So why are we funding a pool that has been closed to the public and nobody anticipates it opening up again this year?
Let me get to that in a minute. Let's do this in order. So first of all, with regard to anti-displacement, that work absolutely is continuing. It has been directed to continue. We will continue to work with anti-displacement PDX and other community-based partners. I'll call on Director Durbin first. I also see that Director Callahan's on the phone, and she might want to talk about displacement after Director Durbin. Director Durbin.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Commissioner Hardesty, for the question. Absolutely important to resource our partners and community groups to engage with the city. The city did, through last year's fall bump process, allocate resources. And in last April, the City Council made the decision to allocate those resources to ADPDX, our key partner, and their community partners to engage in this process. So there's 180,000 that City Council has already allocated that we are distributing now to community groups to engage with us and be equal partners in this anti-displacement task force.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And Director Callahan, I believe you're on if you have a comment as well.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners. The Housing Bureau, Prosper Portland, and the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability have been working closely on how to make sure that our anti-displacement work with the community going forward is both coordinated and takes into account some of the current realities that we're facing. I think one of the things I'm proudest of in the mayor's, or I'm pleased about, I should say, in the mayor's proposed budget is the allocation of an $8.1 million in rent support for the community facing post-COVID, both in terms of reallocation of existing home funds and CDBG funds. We will be convening a small work group in cooperation with our partners and community beginning very shortly to identify what's the best way for us to spend those funds as quickly as possible that makes the biggest impact in the community in the next coming months once hopefully the budget is adopted. And I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions. Thanks for the opportunity to talk.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, Director Callahan. Commissioner Udaley has her hand up. Commissioner Udaley. Muted.
One of my questions got a little lost in my longer remarks. I would like Director Kennard to describe how they arrived at 9% as being the right cut for special appropriations allocations, and if you could speak to the equity considerations that were involved with that. I am obviously particularly concerned with RAC and decreasing funding to the arts when the arts are already hard hit, and when RAC has made a very deep commitment to a new equitable funding strategy for our arts organizations.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner, for the question. You'll recall in the long bar chart that I was walking through, the first strategy that the mayor's proposed looked to reduce or to balance about $75 million decline was eliminating the forecast. And that was about $29 million. That left us with about $48 million that we had to solve for. And even though a number of the strategies that the mayor took were ones that did not impact current services, they were pulling on our reserves or our set-asides, they were impacting city programs in a way. And so the 9% is what the target would have been for everyone across the city if we didn't pull on those reserves and those set-asides. That would have been that $48 million spread across all of our services would be a 9% reduction. So that's how that number 9% was arrived at. When we looked through the ongoing special appropriation allocations, we looked at those allocations that were specifically targeting historically underrepresented communities. And for those allocations, those were either determined to have to be kept with flat funding, so funding that was reduced just by an inflationary agreement, or in a very few certain specific situations where we were legally required to retain inflation, or it was a specific population that especially is in need during the COVID-19 crisis, the mayor decided to include the inflationary adjustment.
Great, thank you. You cut out there for a moment, but I think I got the gist of it.
And it might be worthwhile to have a follow-up, Director Kennard, with Commissioner Udaley, just so she can get her answer fully.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you.
And Mayor, if you, the last thing was about the, I think Columbia Pool, you were gonna.
Oh yes, Columbia Pool. But before I jump in, I want to see if Director Long is on this call, or somebody from the Parks Bureau.
Mayor, both myself and Claudio Capizano.
Oh, there you go. Okay, thanks. Why don't you answer that? And if I feel so compelled, I'll add commentary at the end.
Commissioner Hardesty, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering why we're funding Columbia Pool when there's no anticipation of it opening before next summer.
Well, that's not necessarily altogether true. I think that right now we are looking at how we can reactivate our spaces based on the COVID guidance that we're receiving through the state, as well as public health guidance. So we're continuing that conversation.
So that's it. Just having a conversation. Okay. All right.
I'll add some commentary to this as well. As you'll recall, last year, this was one of the most hotly debated issues during our budget process. And we had to make a decision in a relatively short period of time. Do we close it or do we continue it till we have a bridge to a sustainable funding mechanism? Not necessarily so that we can save Columbia Pool, as you're all aware from the conversations, the extensive conversations we had last year. The pool has considerable capital maintenance issues.
Yes.
So really the question was save it during the interim so that people, particularly in that neighborhood who are not otherwise served by a swimming pool, would have access to a pool until we could talk about the larger vision for a newer state-of-the-art facility at Charles Jordan. And in my conversations with Commissioner Fish and others at the time, we decided that given that we do not have an alternative in the meanwhile, it makes sense to go ahead and bridge this with the expectation that the sustainable parks vision will come back to the council relatively soon. And I don't have that specific date, maybe Director Long does, but I made a decision in the context of this budget to go ahead and bridge that facility until we have that discussion about the sustainable future funding for the whole park system.
Thank you. I appreciate your thinking and adding that to the budget. But again, as we're talking about priorities right now, as we are smack dab in the middle of the pandemic, to me, that just didn't rise to as high as, say, a civil rights Title VI program coordinator, right? So, right, if I'm weighing pros and cons, I'm concerned that we're not really reflecting. And I agree. I mean, we need to do something about Columbia Pool. I just don't know whether funding it for another year to be empty is a good use of limited resources. So
yeah, and that's a judgment call. That's a value call, and it's one worth hashing out. The two equity decisions I made around Columbia Pool was, number one, there is no alternative facility for that neighborhood in Northeast Portland. There are a good many low-income individuals in that area who cannot afford a private membership at a club with a swimming pool. And number two, this is maybe slightly off subject, but it's one of the reasons I have supported public swimming opportunities generally, is the disproportionate number of drownings in not only our community, but elsewhere around the country of people, particularly of lower income, particularly people of color. And it just seemed a little mean to me that in the context of this budget, I would be withdrawing the only facility available to many people in the community. But your point is also a very well taken point. It is not inexpensive. It is not an immaterial addition to the budget. And I think it's a worthy conversation to have. But on balance, I decided it made sense to keep it in.
Jessica, can you tell me again the timeline? So is it tonight that we have the public budget meeting, and then it's next week that we vote on your budget? Is that right?
Correct. So tonight is the public hearing, the virtual public hearing on the mayor's proposed budget. And then next Wednesday, council will take up and vote on the approved budget. And so next Wednesday is the time where council will offer amendments to the proposed budget and vote on the approved budget.
Excellent. And then tomorrow we're voting on the spring bump.
That's right. Yes.
And remind me, when is the work session on the CARES Act funding?
So I believe Sonia is on the line, so she can confirm this for me. I believe it was scheduled for May 27th. Sonia, is that correct?
May 26th, 2 Tuesdays from now.
May 26th, thank you. Just trying to keep all these dates in my head. Thank you. So that means that we would have fully voted on the mayor's proposed budget before we would have had a conversation about how we're investing CARES dollars. Is that correct?
That is right, Commissioner. So you will have voted on the approved budget. There's one final stage, which is the adoption, but we are restricted from making very large changes between the approved and the adopted phase. However, my intention is to, once council determines how they would like to allocate the CARES resources, we can bring a separate ordinance to amend the budget to reflect those actions that you'd like to take.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Good discussion. Thank you.
Excuse me, I've had my hand up for quite some time.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Fritz. I had scrolled down. I'm sorry, I did not see you. Commissioner Fritz.
That's quite all right. Thank you very much. I was waiting patiently. I want to first applaud the mayor for putting in the money for Columbia Pool. It's keeping his word that he said he was going to, and it's keeping his commitment to North Portland, which does have a high proportion of people who can't afford other swimming options. And there is no other pool. I don't know that there's any private pools in that area. So we heard in multiple budget sessions last year and previously that there are a lot of seniors, a lot of people of color and others who depend on that pool. And I know my daughter's a swimmer, and she's being without the pool is one of the hardest things for her about the whole isolation thing. So I support keeping it in. And of course, if it does remain closed for an extended period, then that would mean that some of that money would not be expended, because presumably most of the money is for operations and staffing, rather than, as the mayor said, it's not for large capital investment. And again, Commissioner Hardesty, I appreciate your support on the Office of Equity and Human Rights and the Civil Rights position. However, that's an ongoing request, and this Columbia Pool allocation is a one-time. So I support keeping it in. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fritz. Thank you for your patience. All right, any other issues? All right, Director Kennard, it looks like we've come to the end of this conversation. And just a reminder, then this meeting of the Budget Committee will be continued to this evening, May 12th at 6:30 p.m., where public testimony will be received virtually on the proposed budget. This proposed budget hearing will be broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel, which is www.portlandoregon.gov/video, as well as on cable channel 30. So unless there's anything else for the good of the whole here.
Mayor, I just wanted to say that if the public is attempting to view us this evening, I have heard that it is easier to log into Open Signal because the captioning is in real time as compared to how it's done otherwise.
Okay, that's good feedback. That's good to know.
I just learned it myself. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that with everybody. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Director Kennard.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.